I got up, and just as I was about to get up, the two lawyers were like, Gary, wait, we have to talk to you about something. I said, what's that? And they said, listen, okay, this is just one bank. You've got like 4 more mortgages on this property. What are we going to do about those? Well, that's when I leave town. And so they both laughed. They were like, oh, Gary, listen. They said, don't you understand? You can't just leave town. Like, they have your name, your social security number, your date of birth. Like, they'll find you. I mean, this could be a real problem. And I remember I looked at both of them and I said, you're assuming my name's Gary Sullivan. And I remember thinking to myself, they don't meet a lot of guys like me. Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I am continuing telling my story. This is, I don't know what this is. I don't know what part this is. Part 8. Okay, so this is part 8, and I'm currently, so at this point, I'm in South Carolina. I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, and I have assumed I started a scam with using the name Gary Lee Sullivan, Gary Sullivan, which was a transient that I had met in a homeless. He was also a male prostitute that I'd met in Nevada, in Las Vegas, and I'd gotten an ID in his name in South Carolina, and was starting a scam in his name. So let's see. So I wrote a book called Shark in the Housing Pool. Here's what I want to mention is every once in a while I'll see one of these quotes that I put in the book. And the quote is, Cox and Houck disappeared from Georgia last summer, then resurfaced in Columbia, South Carolina for more of the same, using false IDs and forged documents and setting up a phony loan company to snare more than $1 million in fraudulent loans, the Chicago Tribune. Bro, what the hell, Like, it's ridiculous. And then this is one from Fortune magazine wrote, Cox has the ability to dramatically alter his appearance. He frequents tanning salons and has had numerous cosmetic surgeries, which is true. At this point, I have had a nose job. So I had a nose, because look, my picture was, I was on the Secret Service's most wanted list. The FBI's looking for me. The U.S. Marshals are looking for me. I got, there's posters of me. Like, I know they're looking for me. There's all these articles that are coming out, and I know it's bad. So I ended up getting a nose job. I had a couple different liposuction surgeries. And, I had lost weight. I had 2 hair transplants, or 2, they call them hair grafts, whatever. They're not plugs. So 2 hair grafts where they actually cut the hair out of the back of your head, like the little seeds that make your hair grow, and they implant them in your hair. Because when I left Tampa, I was, was thinning, and my hairline was receding. So I had that done. I had what's called a mini facelift. So by this point, I look drastically different. It's still me, but I definitely, it's questionable. I've lost weight. I'm tanning. I'm wearing my hair different. And I have an ID in the name Gary Lee Sullivan. I go to South Carolina. And now, keep in mind that Becky Houck and I are living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I haven't done these in a while. I mentioned Becky, right? Yeah, she was, okay. Okay. So, yeah, of course I mentioned her. Anyway, so we are living in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I'm going to run a scam in Columbia, South Carolina. So I'm in Columbia, and the first thing I do is after I get the ID, I go to a corporate lawyer, and I set up a couple of shell companies. I tell him that I'm a lender, and I need to open a couple corporations. So we open a few corporations. And then I go around, after I've got the corporations opened, I go to several different banks and I open up corporate bank accounts. And then I go to several other banks and I open up personal accounts for Gary Lee Sullivan. The other thing I did was, there's a lot of things that, like in the book, I don't mention. Uh, One of the things is that what I did was, uh, I, when I pulled Sullivan's credit, he had a bunch of medical collections. So I had to contact his medical collection people, and I paid off probably about $20,000 worth of medical collections. I also, of course, got a few secured credit cards in his name, so he had some semblance of somebody who's kind of rebuilding his life. You've got the medical collections that were paid off. You've got a few new credit cards. And then I turned around and I got a business card made. I set up a website for Labor on Demand, which was supposedly the company he worked for. I set up what's called they call them HQs, which are like virtual offices. You can actually rent real offices. They typically have them almost everywhere. They have them in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta, Charlotte, Columbia. They have them in most major cities, Orlando, Miami, whatever. I'm not sure Columbia would be considered a major city, but anyway, they had one. So you could call and they'll give you a phone number. So you could put that on your business card. So if somebody called the business, it would be answered by a real person, and they would either take a message and then email you, or they would reroute the phone call to you. So you have to understand. So I've got all of this stuff set up in the name of Gary Sullivan, and I have corporations set up. I have bank accounts. I have everything. So then I turn around and I contact a realtor. I want to say his name was Griffin. Anyway, I contact this realtor, and I tell him, hey, I want to buy a house. I want to buy a piece of property owner-occupied. I'm sorry. God, what am I saying? I want to buy a house, to buy, but it has to be, I want to buy the house to live in it, but I want to buy a house, and I need the owner to owner finance it. Like, I'll put down 10%, but I need them to owner finance it. And so he and I drive around. We look at like probably 5 or 6 houses the first day. And I come back and I say, I find, we put like 5 contracts down on probably out of the 6 houses. I think we put 5 contracts down on these houses, where I put like $1,000 down. And I said, look, write up a contract telling them I'll put down 10%, and they have to hold a 90% mortgage, and it's what's called a wraparound. Like, even if they have a first mortgage, they can still hold a mortgage on the house, and they just wrap their mortgage around the first mortgage. So they're still technically in first mortgage position, kind of. And that I would make my payments to them, and then they could pay their current mortgage company. And, look, not all real estate agents even know how to do this. But I explained it to Griffin. He kind of explained it. He ended up, what was his name, bro? What's the guy's name? Griffin? Shoot. Anyway, whatever. So we end up getting two of the homeowners come back, and they say, okay, fine, no problem. We'll do the owner financing. And one of those guys was a guy that sold. He sold. What did he sell? He sold chemicals. He was like a chemical salesperson that sold some kind of chemicals to pesticides and stuff like that. So and he was selling his house, and he was actually behind on his mortgage. So part of my down payment went to catch up his mortgage with his mortgage company. Second guy was a doctor, and I ended up going. He agreed to owner finance that property. So I met with both of them. Obviously they want to know the story. They're like, well, why can't you go to a bank? And of course I would say, I can't go to a bank because, I was in a car accident or something, several years ago, or I forget exactly what the story was I told them, but it was some bullshit. And they never asked me anyway. I had ended up telling the real estate agent that I had, and he would tell them. So it was something along the lines of, I'd been in an accident or something, and I had, several years ago, and I had a bunch of medical collections, which fit with Gary Sullivan, and then I was rebuilding my credit. And I couldn't get a loan from a bank. I worked for the same company for 5 years, and I gave him my business card. And so he then conveyed that information to the homeowners. Homeowners agreed to go ahead and owner finance the properties. I went to 2 different closings, bought the one property from the one guy. It was cheap. It was like $110,000. It wasn't a big deal. The other property was worth about $230,000, the one that the doctor owned. And the doctor, they were moving to Atlanta, Georgia. So I go to the closing and I close on the property, and that's great. It's great. It works out great. I've got the properties, or I now am in possession of both the properties. And here's the thing, like if you borrow money on a house, the bank will lend you more money if you live in the house. So Becky and I drove around, and we ended up getting a bunch of boxes, and we got boxes, and we just opened all the boxes and just piled them up, right? So it looked like I just moved in. I went and I got furniture, and real cheap furniture, and had it delivered, plastics on it, didn't even take the plastic off. Bought a bunch of cheap frames. Really filled this house up with a lot of cheap furniture, but it's wrapped up in plastic, and it who knows? You don't even know that it's cheap. Like if you're an appraiser, you come to the house and you walk in, it looks like I live there. Bought a couple of beds, put the beds in, just leaned them up against the wall. It looks like I live here, like I just moved in. And boxes, like we wrote like kitchen, and put a bunch of boxes in the kitchen that said kitchen, put, just a bunch of junk. We spent like a whole day just doing this. And so the one house definitely looks like I live in the one house. The other house, we did the same thing in the other house. So I then turned around and I went downtown. I waited about a week or so, and I went downtown, and I went to public records downtown for real estate, and I found the recorded deed. And I found the deed to both houses, and I found the mortgages on both houses. So I satisfy the loans that these people had on their homes. I satisfy the loans for both of them. I create what's called a satisfaction of mortgage. I fill it out. I get it notarized. I didn't get it notarized. I notarized it myself because I had a notary stamp. So I notarized the document. I go back downtown and I file it in public records, and that basically satisfies the mortgages that are currently on the house in the other people's names. Now, keep in mind, these guys also put first mortgages on the properties also in their name. It's called a wraparound. I then went back, got a copy of those documents, made satisfaction of mortgages for those documents, went back downtown and satisfied those loans on both the houses. So now I own these 2 houses. It's basically $350,000 worth of real estate I own free and clear. I don't technically I have mortgages on them. It appears I have mortgages, I have mortgages, but it appears I don't. And keep in mind, too, because I had owner financed these properties, they don't show up on Gary Sullivan's credit. So I then turn around and I go to, I don't want to say 6 or 7 different banks, and I apply for loans on those properties. I get, I want to say like 8 or 9 mortgages on these properties. I closed one on one house, on the smaller of the 2 houses, the one that's going for like 110. I closed like 4 or 5 loans on that one, and I get like because these guys are only lending me like $96,000 or $90,000 or $100,000 on the property, and I closed 4 or 5, like $500,000 on that property. But I'm going to focus more on the larger property, which was the one owned by the doctor. So I then turn around, I close on like 5 loans on that property, and those loans are like, hey, I hope you're enjoying the video, and if you're interested in buying a painting from me, my contact information is in the description box. Back to the video. Keep in mind, I have a mortgage on the properties too, so the money's not going directly to me. Some of the money's going to me, some of the money's going to the corporations, so I can deposit those checks into the corporate accounts. Because, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines at the time, I don't know what they are now, probably the same. They have an issue with just cutting you a check for more than $100,000. So what I did was I would have like $190,000 going to a corporation that appeared to be a mortgage company, and maybe $5,000 or $10,000 would go to me personally. And so, but either way, I'm getting the money because I'm in control of both of those two entities. So I would then take the money out of those entities and deposit, kind of spread it out amongst all of my bank accounts. And then I'd start removing that money in cash. And that's what I was in the middle of doing. I was slowly removing that money in cash. Listen, this whole time, you have to understand, this whole time, Becky and I are going everywhere. We're going to Bermuda. We're going to Mexico. We're going to Jamaica. We're flying all over the place. And I remember one time we'd actually gone to New Orleans, and there was a I think I did say this, where there was we went to New Orleans and stayed on like Royale Street, which is right next to Bourbon Street. And when we were there, we hung out there for like a week or 10 days or something. Then we went home. And I later found out, when I ordered documents on myself, I found out that the U.S. Marshals had actually been there the same time we were there. There was a famous artist by the name of Matthew Cox. Now, I'm also an artist. And what ended up happening was, because I'm an artist, the U.S. Marshals had found out that there was a guy named Matt Cox who was having a gallery, like a showing. And so they sent 2 U.S. Marshals to the gallery to ask them if the Matt Cox who was doing the having a art exhibit or showing or whatever you want to call it, they showed him my picture and said, "Is this the Matt Cox that's the artist here?" And the owner looked at it and said, "Listen, I've known Matt Cox for whatever he said, 5 years or something. That's not him." But they happened to be, and by the way, that gallery was only like 2 streets away from where we were staying. Just so happens that 2 marshals were there at the same time I was there. And I may have told that story earlier, but I always thought that was amazing. Like when I got the documents from Freedom of Information Act, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. Back to Columbia, South Carolina. So I've got these 2 loans, and I'm pulling money out of the properties. But I'm staying in Charlotte. So one morning, and keep in mind, when I did these closings, I would close like within a day or 2. So what happens is you close these loans let's say I close 4 loans on a property or 5 loans on a property. The title company would then, you'd sign, you go to 5 different title companies or 4 different ones or 6 different ones. So no one title company knows about the other loans. And what happened is I would sign the documents and the title company gets it. Then they put together a package. Then they mail those documents to public records. Then they just get recorded. Like the person in public records doesn't realize that there shouldn't be 6 loans on this one house. They have no idea. All their job is to get the loan document, scan a copy of it into public records, and then that's it. So it's not a big deal. I'm steadily pulling cash out, $8,000, $9,000, $4,000, slowly pulling cash out of all these different bank accounts. And what ends up happening is, one day I'm sitting at home in Charlotte, in my apartment in Charlotte, and I get a phone call. And Gary Sullivan gets a phone call because I'm actually living in Charlotte as a guy named Michael Eckert. And I get a phone call from a lawyer with, I want to say it was Washington Mutual Bank. I'm going to say Washington Mutual. Anyway, from Washington Mutual Bank, the guy calls me up and he's like, "Listen, hey, is this Gary Sullivan? Is this Gary Sullivan?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is Gary Sullivan." And he says, "Hi, this is whatever his name was from Washington Mutual Bank. I'm a lawyer." And he says, "We have a problem." And I go, "What's that?" He said, "The problem is that we got a phone call from one of the title companies that says that we have a first lien position on this property, but somebody else is in front of us." So he's saying we're supposed to be in first position on the title, and we're not. Apparently there's another loan in front of ours. we don't know how this happened, but it appears to be some kind of a scam or something. And, we're thinking about calling the FBI, and we're not really sure what's happening. So we're hoping you could kind of explain it. And I said, whoa, 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 listen, bro. I said, let's not call the FBI. Hey, you haven't called anybody, have you? And he was like, no, I haven't called anybody. And he said, but apparently, he said, I feel like this is maybe there's some kind of a scam happening here. I don't know what you're up to. I said, well, listen, do me a favor. I said, give me about an hour or so. Let me go to talk to my corporate lawyer, and I'm going to give you a call back. Is that cool? And he goes, yeah. I go, don't call anybody till you hear from me. He said, no problem. I'll give you a couple hours. So I then jump in my car and I drive to Columbia, South Carolina. On my way there, I call the corporate lawyer who set up all these corporations for me. I call him and I explain to him what happened. And he goes, wow, Gary, this sounds like it could be a criminal action. My partner handles all of the law firm's criminal work. I'm going to have him here when you get here. So I show up and I say, listen, here's what's going on. And I explain the situation. He says, and I tell him that I've actually borrowed like 5 mortgages on this property. And he says, wow. So both the lawyers are you serious? I don't know if it was 4 or 5. Anyway, so let's say 5. And I said, yeah, I've got 5 mortgages. And they go, oh my God. They go, what were you thinking? And I said, look, I just needed the money. And I think I told them, look, I went to a couple of different loan officers at the banks, and they said that they could fix this whole thing. And they were like, look, and I said, look, man, I need to pay off this Washington Mutual. So I need you to call. So the criminal lawyer's like, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want you to call him and get him to sign something saying that he agrees that they're not going to contact law enforcement. And I remember he said, well, I don't know why he would contact law enforcement. He said, this is just a creative financing error. This isn't criminal. He's like, we're not going to admit that this is not criminal. What you did was just a creative financing error. And so I was like, okay, which I was pretty sure that I was not a creative financing error, since obviously my name's not Gary Sullivan, and the FBI and Secret Service weren't chasing me around the country because of creative financing. It was clearly fraud. But that's what he wanted to go with, so that's fine. And so he calls up Washington Mutual's lawyer, and Washington Mutual's lawyer says, okay, look, I can, if this guy can give us the money back, and really it wasn't that much money. It was on the smaller house, which was like $100,000. So he said, does he have the $100,000? And I was like, yeah, I got that. And he goes, do you still have it? And I said, of course I have. Yeah, I have it. And he says, okay. He said, if he can just give us the $100,000 back, we won't contact anybody. And I was like, okay, cool. So at first they said he wanted me to go get a cashier's check and bring it to Washington Mutual Bank and deposit and have the manager call me. And I was like, listen, bro, I'm not going into a bank. Like, my buddy Travis had been arrested going back to a bank when we knew there was a problem. Like, I'm not stupid. I'm not going into a bank when I know there's a problem. So I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'll bring the cashier's check here to you, to the lawyer. And the lawyer explained that to their lawyer, and my lawyer explained it to their lawyer, and their lawyer was like, okay, that's fine. So that's what happened. I got up and I went, and I remember I got up, and just as I was about to get up, the 2 lawyers were like, Gary, wait, we have to talk to you about something. I said, what's that? And they said, listen, okay, this is just one bank. You've got like 4 more mortgages on this property. What are we going to do about those? I said, well, my immediate problem is just paying off these people. And they said, yeah, but listen, there's 4 more mortgages. Like, what are you going to do? Like, what are you going to do if they find out about the other mortgages? And I went, well, that's when I leave town. And so they both laughed. They were like, oh, Gary, listen. They said, don't you understand? You can't just leave town. Like, they have your name, your social security number, your date of birth. Like, they'll find you. I mean, this could be a real problem. And I remember I looked at both of them and I said, you're assuming my name's Gary Sullivan. And they both were like, whoa. And I remember thinking to myself, they don't meet a lot of guys like me. And they said, well, I remember the corporate lawyer goes, the criminal lawyer goes, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I said, right. I said, my immediate problem is paying these guys off. I said, I'll be back with a cashier's check. I jump in my car, I go get a cashier's check, I come back. When I come back, I give it to them, and he calls them and says, look, we have the cashier's check. He reads off the whole thing. He faxes them a copy. He says, we'll have the money wired to you in the next day or two. And so that's done. I'm good with that. And I remember the lawyer looked at me and said, well, we need to discuss our fee. And I went, okay. Which was funny because like you'd think you'd want to discuss their fee before they did all this work. And I said, okay, well, what do you think's fair? And he said, well, I said, you got a couple hours in this at this point. And he goes, yeah, I know, but it's a lot of phone calls and it's a dicey situation. And he said, he goes, I'm thinking $1,500. And I went, okay. And I pulled out, some money out of my pocket, and I start counting out $1,500 in cash. He goes, no. He said, well, Gary, we don't typically take cash. We typically take a check. And I looked at him and I go, after what you just heard I've done, you take a check from me. And he goes, yeah, you know what? Go ahead and give me cash. So I counted out the cash, gave him the cashier's check, of course, and I left his office. Went straight to a bank and removed more money. Went to another bank, removed more money. Went to another bank. So, it was going to take, I had about 1.3. At this point, I still had like 1.3 million, 1.2 million maybe. No, I had 1.3 million after I gave him the 100,000 back. So I was pulling out cash. I knew it was going to take about a month or so for me to get all the cash because I was removing it slowly. I was also getting cashier's checks and depositing the cashier's checks in other bank accounts. That way, the balances just you didn't have like 300,000 in one account and it's just drained. I was doing it so that the balances would go up and down, up and down. So I would go in and I'd deposit a cashier's check for $30,000 and I'd ask for $8,000 back. And they would cut me the check. It's funny, that whole time I only got a 2 or 3 suspicious activity reports filed on me. Never got a CTR filed on me. I found all this out later when I eventually get caught. So I'm removing money, no big deal. I remember at this point, Becky and I were just at each other's throats. She was miserable. She was stoned all the time. It was just horrible. Like living with her, like bringing her with me was just the biggest mistake ever. And we have different identities. We have fake identities. She's got a bunch of friends, but she doesn't have a job. Like I remember telling her, maybe you should get a job, because she was someone that, like, if she didn't have something to do, she was like a child. Like she would just get into trouble. And she was stoned all the time or drunk. And, I don't really go out. Like, I'm not a guy that goes out. I'm not a flashy person. We had nice vehicles. Obviously, we were both driving sports cars. And she had like an Infinity, Infinity SUV. And we had nice vehicles. We're going on vacation. I'm trying to keep her occupied. We're doing rock climbing and going on these, going out as much as I was willing to go out. And she had a bunch of friends, but periodically she was bipolar, so she would have these mood swings, and I remember one night, and she started screaming. This actually happened I only talk about I think 2 different occasions in the book, but this happened like 3 times where she just was screaming and hollering about how you ruined my life and I can't believe you did this to me. And I was like I don't even know you. You begged to come with me. And I kept telling her, you really haven't done anything wrong yet. Well, you can go home. Like, I'll get $100,000. I'll get $200,000 and we'll put it aside for you, and you can get a lawyer. And you're like, I'm trying to get rid of her. And I remember one time she screamed so much that I knew it was in the middle of the night. She just lost it. I remember thinking the cops are coming. So I just left. I grabbed a bag, threw a bunch of stuff in a duffel bag, and left. And I got in the car and started driving. And she calls me up. She must have called me like 50 times. And by the time I finally answered the phone, I remember the cops had just gotten there. And the cops told her, listen, if this guy, like one of the neighbors had called, because she was screaming so loud. And the cop said, listen, had this guy been here, one of the two of you would have had to have gone to prison or gone to jail. So, I mean, this chick's going to get me caught. She's a lunatic. What else had I done at this point? God, I remember this point. I was living as Michael Eckert, and I had his name changed to Michael Johnson just to see if I could do it, see what the process was, because I was trying to figure out how to kind of create a whole synthetic identity by kind of altering a person so much that they became their own person. Like I was already able to get passports and I had like at this point probably half a dozen, no more than that, probably a dozen passports at this point. When I get caught, eventually I got caught, I had like 24 passports. But at this point I probably have like maybe a dozen passports, and we're traveling all the time. So Becky's a lunatic. She's spending money like you can't believe. She got a bunch of plastic surgery. She got a boob job. She got liposuction. She had two tummy tucks. Listen, she looked amazing. She did. She looked amazing by the time she had all the surgery. All right, at this point, things are going good. I think I have $600,000 or $700,000 I pulled out of the bank. Plus, we still have some money left over. But the way Becky's spending money, it's outrageous. I came home one day and she had bought a new SUV. Like, it was just ridiculous. And I was like, well, what are you fucking doing? Like, I started going, what are you doing? You're blowing all the money. You're pissing away all the money on stuff that we really, I wasn't sure exactly how we were going to get the money back. You bought a brand new SUV. And when you've already got a sports car, and she was like, oh, the sports car wasn't big enough for all of her friends to go out. And, and listen, she's going nuts. She's going on little vacations with her friends. So she screamed. I remember the one time she got the cops called. I wouldn't come back until she agreed to get her own apartment. So I had her go and get an apartment at a building right down the street, like from her. And I remember from her balcony, she could see my apartment, into my apartment. She was crazy. So here's what happens. One day I go to Colombia and I'm removing money. What I didn't know was that one of the loans that I had applied for, the woman that I applied for the loan with had gone on vacation and had never put the title work in. So when she got back from vacation, she called me and said, look, we can probably close next week. And I said, and by that point, I'd already closed like 5 loans on the property. So I didn't want to close her loan because I knew there were other loans were already showing up in public records. So I didn't want her to continue her loan process because I knew when the title company that she used searched public records, they were going to see those other recorded mortgages. So when she called me, I said, cancel the loan. I've already refinanced with my bank. She said, oh gosh, I'm sorry, Gary. I didn't realize you were in a hurry. And I said, yeah, well, it's not a big deal. I said, but do me a favor. I said, make sure to cancel the title work being done. I don't want anybody to go down to public records and spend all that time searching the title, And she goes, oh, it's not a big deal. I understand. I'll cancel it. She didn't cancel it. What ended up happening was somebody went to public records, an abstractor went to public records. An abstractor is a person that goes and does all the title work for the title companies. An abstractor went to public records. They saw that there were 3 mortgages on the property. There were actually 4 or 5, including the 2 that I'd satisfied. However, they only saw 3 for some reason. So they immediately contacted the bank. They said, oh, this is fraud. There's 3 mortgages on this thing. Like, something's up. And this guy's trying to borrow another mortgage. Like, something's wrong. So they made a few phone calls, and immediately there was an investigation launched. The company that was in charge of that investigation was Wachovia's fraud department. So I go into the bank one day to pull out like $8,000 in cash, like I'm doing every other day. Sometimes it's $4,000, sometimes it's $9,000, whatever. So I walk in one day, with my Gary Sullivan ID, and I go in, and I said, and this is interesting. So, by the way, whenever I would withdraw money, I would tell Becky, hey, I'm going into the bank. She'd go, okay, no problem. And I remember this happened many, many times. Becky would say, hey, what if you get arrested? And I would say, if I get arrested, I'm going to need, all you have to do is call a lawyer, a local lawyer, and have him get me out on bond. Because if I get arrested, it won't be as Matthew Cox. It will be as whatever ID I'm using. Because I'm not typically the kind of guy that walks around. I don't have multiple IDs. I would walk in with a couple credit cards and an ID, pocket lint, everything as the person I am, who I am. So they would typically just arrest me, and I would have a valid ID or driver's license or passport. So my identity wouldn't be in question, so they wouldn't run me right away. And I said, so you get me a lawyer, and they'll be able to get me out before I'm ID'd, because typically they don't try and ID you if you have identification, especially if it's identification issued by that state. So no problem. I go into the bank. I walk into the bank. This was a Wachovia bank. I walked into Wachovia bank, and I put my ID down, and I said, hey, I'd like to remove, I forget what it was, $8,000 or something, $7,000. And the woman goes, okay, hold on. And she walks in the back, which wasn't a big deal because I had, every time I went in there, they would go in the back and they'd make a few phone calls because, I'm withdrawing cash, and it's an account that was open less than 90 days ago. So I'm waiting and waiting. It's not a big deal. And all of a sudden, somebody reaches over my arm and grabs me by the hand and pulls my hand back. I go to turn, and somebody grabs me from the other side, pulls the other arm behind my back, and boom, I feel the handcuffs on me. You know that noise they make? And I turn around, and there are two massive sheriff's deputies from, I want to say it's Richland County. Yeah. Well, it just says Columbus, but it's actually Richland County. So I think they're Richland County sheriff's deputies. So they turn around, they look at me, and they said, Mr. Sullivan, sorry, you're being detained. And they walk me into the manager's office and sit me down. And listen, let me tell you something. I'm just like numb. I'm just going, holy shit, like this is it. They've got me. Hey, sorry for interrupting the video, but I want to let you guys know that if you join my Patreon at the top tier, every single month you get a different painting, and the contact information for my Patreon page is in the description. Back to the video. And I'm waiting. And I said, what's going on? What's happening? The guy goes, well, we don't really know. We were just told to keep you here and detain you until the detective gets here. And I kept thinking to myself, because he said detective, I remember thinking, like, I don't know the difference between an officer, a deputy, an agent, a detective. Like, I don't know these things at the time. And I was like, oh, okay. So I thought the FBI was showing up or the Secret Service. So I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, this guy walks in, probably in his early 30s, mid 30s, let's say. I don't remember exactly. And he walks in. He's got his nice gray suit, and he walks in. He says, hey, Mr. Sullivan, my name is Detective whatever his name was. And he says, my name is Detective whatever, and we've got a phone call. We have a complaint filed by Wachovia's, the head of Wachovia's security department, and their fraud department, and they're saying that you're running some kind of a scam. And I went, really? And he goes, yeah, apparently he said you have 3 mortgages on your piece of property. Now, that was the Willow, I think it was Willow property. Anyway, that was the one that was like $230,000. So there's like $500,000 in mortgages that they've just discovered. Now, they only discovered 3 because there was several more. And so I went, and he said, yeah, apparently you have 3 mortgages on this property. And I went, is that illegal? And the detective went, I don't know. And I remember thinking, oh, I'm walking out of here. What do you mean you don't know? So I was like, oh, okay. He said, let me call Wachovia. So he gets on the phone, and he calls Wachovia, the head of their fraud department. So he gets the guy on the phone, and he's like, hey, I have Gary Sullivan here. And so he's kind of explaining, and he goes, oh, what is the problem? He's like, I'm not even sure what to arrest this guy for. Like, he came in, he borrowed a mortgage. Like, what's the problem? And the guy said, He's running a shotgunning scam, which is exactly the type of scam that I was running. Like, the Wachovia knows exactly what I'm doing. And I'm like, and so I could hear him on the phone. And he said, he's pulling money out in cash. And he looks at me, and he says, he says you have 3 mortgages. I go, right. I said, I have 3 mortgages. And he goes, yeah, he says that's fine. He goes, yeah, there are 3 first mortgages. And I went, no. I said, one was a first mortgage, one is a second mortgage, and one is a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, which isn't true, by the way. They were all first mortgages. But nowhere on the document does a first mortgage say it's a first mortgage. It just says it's a mortgage. It's just a lien placed on your property, right? So I know that that there's no way that he knows that I know that. And so I explain it's a first mortgage, second mortgage, and it's a HELOC. And so the guy from Wachovia goes, they're all first mortgages. And I say, listen, man, I read those documents. None of them even said they were first mortgages. Like and he goes, and so he says, okay, he goes, why would he go to 3 different companies? And he goes, why would you go to 3 different companies, Gary? And I went, okay, look, I said, I came into Wachovia because Wachovia obviously knows they have a first mortgage. I came into Wachovia, I applied for a first mortgage to refinance my property. I refinanced it. I told them that I told the loan officer here, hey, I really need to borrow about $300,000 or $400,000. And the loan officer said, look, we can't give you that much money, but I have a friend that can probably get you a second mortgage and another friend that can probably get you a HELOC. And keep in mind, I don't even know what mortgages they know about. And I remember the detective he flips open and he goes, oh, so that would be Fieldstone Mortgage and SunTrust Bank. And I went, right. Like, literally, he just told me what the mortgages are. I don't even know. And I was like, exactly. I got a second mortgage from Fieldstone and a HELOC from SunTrust. SunTrust at the time was big on HELOCs. They did a lot of HELOCs. Guy from Wachovia is screaming, that's not true. And he says, he even had to tell, the detective even had to tell Wachovia's fraud guy to keep his mouth, to lower his voice, like calm down. He's telling him, arrest him. And so then he says, why is he removing all the money in cash? And he looks at me and he says, why are you removing all the money in cash? And I said, look, I work for a labor company, okay? Now, by the way, by this point, the detective had told me, you're not under arrest. And I showed him my cuffs and I said, I feel like I'm under arrest. And he told the deputy, take the handcuffs off him. So I don't even have handcuffs on at this point. So I said, honestly, I work for a labor company. So I pull out my business card and I hand him my business card and it says labor on demand. And I said, I work for a labor company. All right. I said, we provide a lot of labor for commercial projects. I said, and a lot of our laborers are undocumented. They don't actually have bank accounts, and they typically will have to go to some kind of a person that cashes their check, and they'll take like 10%. I said, I know the checks are good, so typically what I do is I pull out cash, and I cash their checks for them for free because I feel bad for them. And he looked at me and he goes, no, that's. I go, is that illegal? I mean, I don't think that's illegal. And he goes, no, that's not illegal. That's actually very nice of you, and it makes sense. And he said, then that's a good thing. He said, yeah, and he explains it to the guy from Wachovia. He's losing it. So then he says, this guy is running a scam. He goes, he's running a scam. His name isn't even Gary Sullivan. He's using a fake ID. So the funny thing about that is, as he's yelling at that, and which is absolutely true, but my ID had been issued by South Carolina DMV. So he starts yelling. This guy, by the way, the guy from Wachovia is in California. He starts saying, look at the ID. It starts with 000. And the detective says, no, our IDs start with 000. Trust me, this guy's Gary Sullivan. I even ran an NCIC report, which is he ran me through the National Criminal database. So he said, trust me, this is Gary Sullivan. So I remember I looked at the detective and I go, are you serious, bro? I go, now I'm not even Gary Sullivan. I go, come on, man, what are we doing here? And he goes, I know, Gary, I know. So listen, I've totally won over the detective at this point. The detective tells the guy from Wachovia, he says, listen, he said, I don't even know what this guy's done wrong. You know, he said, I don't even know what to charge him with. He goes, I'm going to have him follow me downtown, and I'm going to have him fill out a report. And then, honestly, he said, I'm gonna wait until I talk to the district attorney to see if he's even committed a crime. Listen, the guy from Wachovia is losing it. So he ends up hanging up the phone from the guy from the Wachovia fraud guy. And I stand up, and he says to me, Gary, he said, do you have a driver's license? And I went, well, yeah, I do, but it's in Nevada. And he goes, oh, that's right, you're from Nevada. And he glances at the two sheriff's deputies, and they all grin at each other. And I immediately realized that he ran me through NCIC, which means he knows that the transient that was using his information, I'd stolen his ID, he had been arrested twice for prostitution. So these guys think that I've been arrested twice for prostitution. And they all kind of grin at each other. And I'm like, oh, fuck. So, like a little embarrassed, but I have bigger problems. So anyway, he says, well, do you have your ID with you? And I said, actually, I said, the deputy's got my ID. So he pulls the ID out and he goes, yeah, I got his ID. And he says, do you have a valid driver's license? I said, well, I think so. I think it's valid. And the deputy says, well, I'll check. So he walks out to his police car to check and see if Gary Sullivan has a valid ID. I have no idea if Gary Sullivan has a valid ID. He was a homeless guy that I'd met in Nevada. Who fucking knows? He didn't even have a house. He didn't even have a place to stay. So what ends up happening is the detective said, so the deputy comes back in and he hands me the ID and he goes, yeah, he's got a valid ID. And he goes, oh, okay, cool. He said it's valid. He goes, yeah, it's valid. He goes, well, it says he's 5'10". And they all look at me, and I'm like 5'6". And they all look at me, and I go, well, fellas, with a good pair of shoes. And they all start laughing. Ha, ha, ha. Gary, follow me. And he lets me walk out, get into my car, which, by the way, my car was registered in the name Michael Eckert, which was registered to the address I was living at in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I get in the car, and I follow him back to the police station. I go inside, I fill out a police report, and then when I'm done with the police report, he asked me, "Can you can you stand in the hallway?" I can't. He couldn't leave me in his cubicle for some reason, while he went and got his lieutenant to sign off on it. So I stand in the hallway, and while I'm in the hallway, there's a bunch of wanted posters, and there must have been 50 or 80 of them, right? And there was only one that was in full color, and it was my Secret Service's most wanted poster. So, I ended up before I walked in there, on my way to the police station, Becky had called me. She must have called me 50 times. Like I had like 50 missed messages. So I get the phone, and I'm like, oh my God. So it was ringing as soon as I got in the car, and I go, hey, what's up? She goes, oh my God, where have you been? I was like, I said, listen, man, I got issues. I said, I just got questioned by the police. I'm on my way back to the police station. I'm on my way to the police station right now. And she goes, oh my God. She goes, I just checked the internet. You're number one on the Secret Service's most wanted list. And I was like, oh man. I said, look, I got bigger problems. I said, I got to go in the police station and fill out a police report. She goes, don't go in the police station. Get on the interstate and get out of there. And I went, I can't. There's a cop car behind me. And there's a cruiser was like in front of me, and like the cop car was behind me. I said, I'm boxed in. I can't. I have to play this out. And I said, look, worst case scenario is this. If I get arrested, I'll be arrested as Gary Sullivan. You can get me a lawyer. And before I could say anything, she goes, I'm not getting you a lawyer. I'm not getting you out on bond. I'm not going to risk everything I've got for you. She probably had $600,000 or $700,000 in cash. So I was like, well, I guess I better not get arrested. And I hang up the phone. I go into the police station. I fill out the police report. While I'm waiting in the hallway, I see my Secret Service's most wanted poster. The deputy walks up behind me while I'm glancing at it. He walks up and says, hey, Gary, you ready to go? And I was like, absolutely terrified me. Like I jumped and totally flipped out. So I was like, oh my God. And he says, hey, you ready to go? And I said, yeah, everything fine. He said, yeah. Well, he said, my lieutenant signed off on it. No big deal. We're going to look into it. I'm not sure you've done anything wrong. We'll have to check into it. We get in the elevator, and as I'm walking out, he goes, do me a favor though. He goes, don't go anywhere. Like, don't leave the area, because we do have some questions, and I might want to talk to you again. I said, yeah, no problem, bro. I go, I own a couple houses in this area, so I'm not going anywhere. I work in this area. He goes, okay, cool. So I leave. I go straight to 2 more banks and get out more cash. And then when I walk into the third bank, somebody in the bank, like literally, they see me, and 2 women almost bump into each other trying to get to the telephone. And I knew right then something was up. Like, I didn't know if there was just like a red notice or something, some kind of a warning or something, to if they saw me, to call the police or something. So I saw them. I was like, oh, shit. So I realized what was happening. I turned around, got back in my car, drove off, got on the interstate, and drove back to Charlotte, North Carolina. I remember Becky had called me, and she was like, oh, my God, thank God you're okay. Are you okay? Are you okay? I was like, you bitch. You were going to leave me here? And she's like, no, I was packing a bag. I was going to come get you. But she was never going to come get me. So I ended up leaving. I ended up leaving and driving back to Charlotte. And I think we can end it there. So check out the next video. Super cool. I almost get caught a second time. And the next video is when I actually call the FBI and try and negotiate turning myself in, which doesn't work out, but that's fine. It's a good video. So if you like the video, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Share the video. Leave a comment in the comment section. Hit the bell notification so you get notified. And I appreciate you hanging with me. See ya.